What started as a desperate whisper for warmth in the coldest winter became the foundation of something neither of them saw coming. David never thought he'd be the type of guy to need a roommate. At 28, he figured he'd have his life together by now. But after his long-term relationship ended and he moved to this expensive city for a better job, splitting rent seemed like the smart choice. The apartment hunting was brutal. Everything decent cost more than his monthly salary. When he finally found this place, a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an old brick building, he knew he'd need help paying for it. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, seemed nice enough during the showing. He mentioned the building was from the 1940s, full of character, he said. David should have asked more questions about what that really meant. 3 months of living alone passed quickly. David settled into a routine of work, takeout dinners, and weekend phone calls with his sister back home. The apartment felt too big for just him, and the silence got heavy sometimes. When winter started showing up early, he posted an ad for a roommate online. The responses were mostly terrible. College kids who wanted to throw parties, people who seemed sketchy, or folks who asked weird questions about his personal life. Then Lily replied. Her message was short and professional. She was 26, working on her graduate degree in psychology, clean, quiet, and could pay her share on time. When they met for coffee, she seemed normal, maybe a little reserved, but David preferred that to someone who might blast music at midnight. Lily moved in on a gray October day. She didn't have much stuff, just some boxes of books, clothes, and a few pieces of furniture. She was polite but kept to herself mostly. They'd say good morning when they crossed paths in the kitchen, and she always cleaned up after herself. David thought he'd found the perfect roommate situation. The problem started when the temperature dropped in November. David noticed his heating bill was getting expensive, but the apartment still felt cold. He'd wake up some mornings and see his breath in the air. At first he figured it was just because the place was old. Maybe the windows weren't sealed properly or the insulation was bad. But then Lily started complaining too. She mentioned that her room felt like a freezer at night. She was wearing sweaters indoors and had bought extra blankets, but nothing seemed to help. David called Mr. Peterson, who promised to send someone to look at the heating system. The repair guy came, poked around for an hour, and said everything looked fine to him. The cold got worse as December arrived. David found himself wearing his winter coat inside some days. He could hear Lily's teeth chattering when she talked to him in the kitchen. They both started spending more time at the library or coffee shops just to stay warm. The heating bills kept climbing, but the apartment stayed freezing. It was during the 3rd week of that bitter cold spell when everything changed. David was lying in bed around 2 in the morning, wrapped in every blanket he owned, when he heard a soft knock on his door. He figured maybe there was an emergency, like a pipe had burst or something. When he opened the door, Lily was standing there in an oversized sweater and thick socks, hugging herself and shivering. Her face was pale and her lips looked almost blue from the cold. "I'm really sorry to bother you," she whispered, glancing down the hallway like she was embarrassed. "But my room is like an icebox. I can't sleep. I've been lying there for hours just shaking." David looked past her toward her door. Even from where he stood, he could feel the cold air coming from that direction. His room wasn't warm by any means, but it was definitely better than the rest of the apartment. The heater vent in his room seemed to work a little better than the others. "I was wondering," Lily continued, her voice getting smaller, "if maybe I could just sleep on your floor tonight. I have my own blankets. I just need somewhere that's not completely freezing." David didn't even hesitate. "Of course. Come on in." He helped her drag her mattress and blankets into his room. She set up a little sleeping area near the window, far enough from his bed to keep things appropriate. As she arranged her pillows, David noticed her hands were shaking, and not just from the cold. There was something else there, something he couldn't quite identify. "Thank you so much," she said as she settled down. "I know this is weird. I'll figure something else out tomorrow." "Don't worry about it," David replied, getting back into his own bed. "This building is crazy cold. We'll call the landlord again in the morning." They both tried to sleep, but David found himself lying awake, listening to the sound of Lily's breathing. Every now and then he'd hear her shift around, trying to get comfortable on the floor. He felt bad that she was down there while he had the actual bed, but he also knew offering to share would make things complicated. Just before he finally drifted off, he heard her voice, barely a whisper in the darkness. "I just needed somewhere warm." Something about the way she said it made David think she wasn't just talking about the temperature. but he was too tired to think about it much, and soon he fell asleep to the sound of the wind howling outside their windows. The next morning, Lily was gone before he woke up. Her makeshift bed was cleaned up, and there was a note on his dresser thanking him for his kindness. When he saw her later in the kitchen, she smiled and acted like nothing unusual had happened. They called Mr. Peterson together, and he promised to send a different repair company. But David couldn't shake the memory of how desperate she'd sounded in the darkness, or the way she'd whispered about needing warmth like it meant more than just getting out of the cold. 3 weeks had passed since that first cold night, and David's life had taken an unexpected turn. What started as a one-time favor had somehow become a routine he never saw coming. The second repair company came and went, leaving behind the same story as the first. The heating system was working fine, they said. Maybe the building just had poor insulation. Mr. Peterson shrugged his shoulders and suggested they buy space heaters, easy for him to say when he wasn't the one paying the electric bill. Lily had returned to David's room the very next night after that first time. She knocked softly, apologetically, carrying her pillow and a blanket. "I'm so sorry," she'd whispered. "Just one more night until I figure something else out." But one night turned into 2, then 3, then every night for the past 3 weeks. David found himself expecting her soft knock around midnight or 1 in the morning. Sometimes earlier if it was particularly cold outside. She'd slip into his room quietly, set up her makeshift bed on the floor, and whisper the same thing every time. "I just need somewhere warm." During the day, they maintained a careful balance. Lily would be gone by the time David woke up, her sleeping area cleaned up like she was never there. They'd cross paths in the kitchen, making coffee or grabbing breakfast, and talk about normal roommate things. The weather, work, what to watch on TV. Neither of them mentioned their nighttime arrangement directly, but David was starting to notice things. Small details that made him wonder if there was more to this situation than just a broken heating system. Like how Lily always seemed tired during the day, no matter how early she went to sleep. She'd rub her eyes a lot and drink coffee like her life depended on it. Sometimes he'd catch her staring out the window with this distant look, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. And then there were the phone calls. David's room shared a wall with the kitchen, and sometimes late at night, he could hear Lily talking to someone. Her voice would get tight and stressed, and he'd catch fragments of conversations about money, deadlines, and someone being sick. He tried not to listen, but the walls were thin and she sometimes got emotional. One night, about 2 weeks into their routine, David was lying awake after Lily had settled down on the floor. She'd been quieter than usual when she came in, and he could tell something was bothering her. Just as he was about to fall asleep, he heard her talking. At first he thought she was on the phone, but then he realized she was talking in her sleep, mumbling about her mom, something about hospital bills and how she couldn't afford to fail her classes. She sounded scared even in sleep. David lay there listening, feeling like he was intruding on something private but unable to ignore it. When she said something about not having enough money for groceries next month, he understood why she always declined when he offered to order pizza or suggested they grab dinner somewhere. The next morning, he left an extra sandwich in the fridge with a note saying he'd made too much food. Lily texted him later thanking him, but he could tell she was embarrassed about accepting help. As the days went on, David started paying more attention to Lily's habits. She was always doing schoolwork, hunched over her laptop at the kitchen table with books spread everywhere. Her phone rang constantly, and she'd step outside to take calls that seemed to stress her out. She was thin, maybe too thin, and he wondered if she was eating enough. But the nights were when David saw a different side of her. Not just the person who needed a warm place to sleep, but someone who seemed genuinely troubled. She'd toss and turn on the floor, sometimes making little sounds like she was having bad dreams. A few times he'd heard her crying quietly, so softly he wasn't sure if he was imagining it. David found himself lying awake more often, listening to her breathe, wondering what was really going on in her life. Part of him wanted to ask, to offer more help than just floor space in his room. But another part of him was worried about getting too involved in whatever problems she was dealing with. There was also the uncomfortable truth he was trying to ignore. Having Lily in his room every night was changing how he felt about her. She wasn't just his roommate anymore. There was something intimate about sharing sleep space even when they weren't sharing the same bed. He'd become aware of her presence in a way that made him feel guilty. Sometimes he'd wake up in the middle of the night and glance over at her sleeping form, curled up in her blankets on the floor. She looked peaceful when she slept, younger somehow, and David would feel this strange protective instinct he didn't know what to do with. During the day, he'd catch himself looking at her differently, noticing things like how she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, or the way she smiled when something amused her. These weren't thoughts he should be having about his roommate, especially one who was clearly dealing with serious problems. The whole situation was getting complicated in ways David hadn't expected. What started as a simple solution to a heating problem was becoming something he couldn't easily define. Lily needed help, that much was obvious, but David was starting to realize he might need to figure out what he was really offering, and what he was hoping to get in return. Every night when she knocked on his door and whispered about needing warmth, David wondered if they were talking about the same thing. February had been particularly brutal that year, with temperatures dropping below freezing for days at a time. David had gotten used to wearing sweaters indoors and seeing his breath when he first woke up. So when he came home from work on that Tuesday afternoon and felt actual warmth in the apartment, he thought he was imagining things. But no, the radiators were finally working, really working, not just making noise and pretending to heat the place. David walked through the apartment, feeling the difference in every room. Even Lily's room, which had been like a freezer for months, was now comfortably warm. He felt genuinely happy for the first time in weeks. No more ridiculous heating bills for barely any warmth. No more wearing winter coats inside. And most importantly, Lily could finally sleep in her own room again. When Lily came home from the library that evening, her face lit up as soon as she walked through the door. "Oh my goodness, it's actually warm in here," she said, pulling off her coat and scarf. She went straight to her room and called out, "David, come feel this. It's like a normal temperature for the first time since I moved in." They both stood in her doorway, enjoying the simple pleasure of not being cold inside their own home. Lily's room felt cozy now, not like the Arctic wasteland it had been for months. Her space heater sat unused in the corner, finally unnecessary. "Mr. Peterson must have finally found someone who knew what they were doing," David said. "I can't believe it," Lily replied, sitting on her bed and bouncing a little like a kid. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to not be shivering all the time." That evening, they celebrated by cooking dinner together, something they'd rarely done because the kitchen had been too cold to spend much time in. Lily made pasta while David put together a salad, and they actually enjoyed standing around the warm kitchen, talking and laughing. But as bedtime approached, David noticed Lily getting quieter. She cleaned up the dishes more slowly than usual, found reasons to stay in the common areas instead of going to her room. When she finally said goodnight, there was something uncertain in her voice. David went to his room and got ready for sleep, expecting to enjoy his first night alone in weeks. It would be nice to spread out in bed again, not worry about waking someone else up if he tossed and turned. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt oddly lonely. Around midnight, he heard it. The same soft knock on his door that had become such a familiar sound. But this time, when he opened it, Lily looked different. She wasn't shivering or wrapped in extra layers. She was just standing there in her regular pajamas, looking nervous and a little embarrassed. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi," David replied, confused. "Everything okay? Is your room getting cold again?" Lily shook her head, looking down at her feet. "No, it's fine. It's warm. Perfect temperature, actually." They stood there in awkward silence for a moment. David waited for her to explain why she was there, but Lily seemed to be struggling with what to say. She started, then stopped. "This is going to sound crazy. Try me," David said gently. "I can't sleep," she admitted, finally looking up at him. "I laid down in my bed in my warm room and I just stared at the ceiling for 2 hours. I kept waiting to fall asleep, but nothing happened." David frowned. "Maybe you're just not used to the different temperature yet. It might take a few nights to adjust." "No, it's not that," Lily said quickly. "I mean, maybe partly, but..." She took a deep breath. "I think I got used to sleeping here. In your room. And now that I don't have to anymore, I realize I don't want to stop." The honesty in her voice caught David off guard. He'd been expecting this conversation eventually, but not quite like this. "Lily," he said carefully, "you know you don't need to sleep on my floor anymore. You have your own comfortable room now." "I know that," she replied, sounding almost frustrated with herself. I know it doesn't make logical sense, but when I'm lying in there alone, I feel—" She paused, searching for the right words. "I feel anxious, like something bad might happen and no one would know." David studied her face in the dim hallway light. She looked tired, but more than that, she looked scared. Not of anything specific, just scared in general, like the world felt too big and unpredictable. "Can I ask you something?" David said. "And you don't have to answer if you don't want to." Lily nodded. "Is everything okay in your life? Besides the apartment being cold, I mean, because lately you seem like you're dealing with a lot of stress." For a moment, David thought Lily might shut down or make an excuse, but instead her shoulders sagged like she'd been carrying something heavy and was finally ready to set it down. "My mom is sick," she said quietly. "Really sick. She's been doing chemotherapy and it's not going well. My dad died when I was in college, so it's just me and her, and I'm here trying to finish my degree while she's back home going through all of this alone." David felt his heart sink. "Lily, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I'm behind on my thesis because I keep having to go home to help her," she continued, the words coming faster now like a dam had broken. "And I'm running out of money because I had to quit my part-time job to have more flexible time for family stuff. I lie awake at night thinking about what happens if she gets worse or if I fail out of school, or if I can't pay rent next month." She was crying now, not dramatically, just quiet tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. "When I sleep in here," she said, gesturing toward his room, "I don't feel so alone with all of that. It's like having someone nearby who cares, even if they don't know all the details. Does that make sense?" David felt a mix of emotions he couldn't quite sort out. Sympathy for what she was going through, guilt that he hadn't realized how much she was struggling, and something else, a warmth that had nothing to do with the finally working radiators. "It makes perfect sense," he said. "And I'm sorry you've been dealing with all of this by yourself." Lily looked up at him hopefully. "So would it be okay if I still slept in here sometimes, even though my room is warm now? I know it's weird and I know I should be able to handle sleeping alone, but—" "You don't have to explain yourself," David interrupted gently. "Of course it's okay." The relief on her face was immediate and profound. "Really? Really? But Lily, you know you can talk to me about this stuff, right? You don't have to carry all of this alone." She nodded, wiping her eyes again. "I didn't want to burden you with my problems. You're already letting me live here and dealing with my sleeping arrangement requests. You're not a burden," David said firmly. "We're friends. Friends help each other." As Lily went to get her pillow and blanket, David realized something had shifted between them. The pretense was gone. They both knew now that this arrangement wasn't really about temperature anymore, and somehow that made it feel more honest, more real. When she settled down on the floor and whispered her usual, "I just need somewhere warm," David understood that she was talking about safety, comfort, and human connection. And for the first time since this all started, he was okay with admitting that maybe he needed those things too. The next few days after Lily's confession felt different in the apartment. There was an honesty between them now that hadn't existed before, but it also made things more complicated. David found himself thinking about her situation constantly, even when he was at work trying to focus on his design projects. He'd catch himself wondering if she'd eaten lunch, or if she'd gotten another stressful phone call from home. When he passed the student counseling center on his way to grab coffee, he thought about suggesting she talk to someone there, but he wasn't sure how to bring it up without sounding like he thought she couldn't handle her problems. Lily had been sleeping in his room every night since the heating got fixed. She'd knock softly around midnight, whisper her usual request for warmth, and settle down on the floor with her blankets. But David noticed she seemed more restless than before. She'd toss and turn more, and sometimes he'd hear her quietly crying in the darkness. On Thursday evening, David made a decision. When Lily came home from the library looking exhausted and stressed, he was waiting in the kitchen with a cup of tea ready for her. "Hey," he said, handing her the mug. "Can we talk for a minute?" Lily accepted the tea gratefully and sat down at the small kitchen table. "Sure, is everything okay?" David sat across from her, trying to figure out how to say what he'd been thinking about all week. "I've been worried about you. Since you told me about your mom and everything you're dealing with, I can see how much stress you're under." "I'm managing," Lily replied quickly, but her voice was tired. "I know you are," David said, "but I don't think you should have to manage it all alone. Have you thought about talking to someone? Like a counselor or therapist?" Lily's face changed, becoming more guarded. "What do you mean?" "The university has free counseling services for students," David explained. I looked it up online. They help people work through anxiety, family stress, all kinds of things. It might help to have someone professional to talk to about what you're going through. So you think I need therapy? Lily asked, and David could hear a defensive edge in her voice. No, that's not what I'm saying, David said quickly, realizing this wasn't going the way he'd hoped. I just think it might be good to have more support. Someone who knows how to help with stress and difficult family situations. Lily was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her tea. When she looked up, her expression was hurt and a little angry. Are you saying this because you don't want me sleeping in your room anymore? She asked. Because you think I'm too dependent on you? No, David said. But even as he said it, he wondered if there was some truth to that. I'm saying it because I care about you and I can see you're struggling. Right, Lily said, standing up abruptly. So you want me to go talk to a stranger about my problems instead of bothering you with them? That's not what I meant at all, David protested. But Lily was already heading toward her room. Thanks for the tea, she said without looking back. And thanks for the advice. I'll think about it. Her door closed with a little more force than necessary, and David sat alone in the kitchen feeling like he'd just ruined something important. That night, for the first time in weeks, Lily didn't knock on his door. David lay awake until almost 3 a.m, listening for her soft footsteps in the hallway. But she never came. The next morning she was polite but distant. She made her coffee, said good morning, and left for school without the usual small talk they'd developed. David felt a knot in his stomach that stayed with him all day. The pattern continued for the rest of the week. Lily was perfectly cordial during the day, but she kept their interactions brief and surface level. She didn't mention her family, her schoolwork, or anything personal, and she spent her nights alone in her own room. David told himself this was probably for the best. Maybe some distance would help them both figure out what their friendship should actually look like. But he missed their late-night conversations, missed knowing she was okay, missed the strange comfort of having her nearby while they slept. By the following Tuesday, David realized he'd made a mistake, not in suggesting counseling, but in how he'd approached it. He'd made Lily feel like her reliance on him was a problem to be solved, when really he'd been trying to help her find more support, not less. He was working late at his computer when he heard Lily's phone ring in the kitchen. Through the thin walls, he could hear her answering, and then her voice getting tight and worried. The conversation went on for almost an hour, and David could tell from her tone that something was wrong. When it finally got quiet, David debated whether to check on her. They hadn't had a real conversation in over a week, and he wasn't sure if his concern would be welcome. But after another 20 minutes of silence, he decided to risk it. He found Lily sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, staring at her phone. Hey, he said softly. I heard your phone ring. Is everything okay? Lily looked up at him, and even in the dim light he could see she'd been crying. My mom's back in the hospital, she said quietly. Her counts dropped again, and they want to try a different treatment. But she sounds so tired, David. She sounds like she's giving up. Without thinking, David sat down next to her. I'm so sorry. When did this happen? Today. She didn't want to worry me, so she waited until after her doctor's appointment to call. Lily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I should go home. I should be there with her. What about your classes? Your thesis? I don't know, Lily admitted. I'm already behind. If I leave now, I might not be able to catch up. But what if something happens and I'm not there? David felt terrible. Here she was, dealing with exactly the kind of crisis he'd suggested she needed professional help with. And instead of being someone she could lean on, he'd created distance between them at the worst possible time. Lily, he said carefully, I owe you an apology. Last week, when I suggested counseling, I wasn't trying to push you away. I was trying to help, but I did it wrong. She looked at him with tired eyes. It felt like you thought I was too much, like my problems were too big for our friendship. That's not true at all, David said firmly. Your problems aren't too big, and I don't want distance between us. I missed having you around this week. Really? Lily asked, and David could hear the hope in her voice. Really, I was trying to help you find more support, not replace the support you have here. I want to be someone you can count on. Lily started crying again, but this time it seemed like relief mixed with sadness. I've been sleeping terribly, she admitted. I keep waking up feeling anxious and alone. You don't have to sleep alone, David said. If it helps to be in the same room, that's okay with me. We're friends. Friends help each other through difficult times. Are you sure? Lily asked. I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, David repeated, meaning it more than ever. Tomorrow we can look into counseling services together if you want. But tonight, if you need somewhere warm and safe to sleep, my door is open. For the first time in over a week, Lily smiled. It was small and sad, but it was real. Thank you, she said. I really do need somewhere warm tonight. Spring arrived early that year, catching everyone by surprise. One day David was scraping ice off his car windshield, and the next week he was opening windows to let in fresh air. The apartment that had felt like a frozen cave for months suddenly felt bright and alive. Again, the change in weather seemed to spark something in both David and Lily. After their honest conversation about boundaries and support, they'd found a better rhythm. Lily had started seeing a counselor at the university twice a week, and while she still slept in David's room most nights, it felt less like desperation and more like a choice. David had also done some thinking about his own patterns. He realized that his suggestion for professional help had come partly from his own discomfort with emotional intimacy. He'd grown up in a family that dealt with problems by staying busy and not talking about feelings too much. Learning to be present for someone else's struggles was new territory for him. The breakthrough came on a warm April morning when Lily got a phone call that changed everything. David was making coffee when he heard her answer the phone in her room, and for once, instead of her voice getting tight with worry, he heard something different. Relief, joy even. When she emerged from her room, she was smiling bigger than David had seen in months. Good news? He asked, handing her a cup of coffee. Amazing news, Lily replied, practically bouncing. My mom's latest test results came back and the new treatment is working. Her counts are improving and her doctor says she's responding better than they hoped. David felt a wave of relief wash over him. He'd been carrying worry about Lily's mom without even realizing how much it had been weighing on him. That's incredible, he said. How is she feeling? Like herself again, she says. She wants to plan a visit here next month to see my apartment and meet my friends. Lily paused, looking a little nervous. I told her about you, about how kind you've been. She wants to meet you. The idea of meeting Lily's mom felt significant in a way David couldn't quite explain. I'd like that, he said. Over the next few weeks as they prepared for the visit, David saw a different side of Lily. She was still dealing with stress about her thesis and finances, but there was a lightness to her that hadn't been there before. She laughed more, spent time doing things she enjoyed instead of just worrying, and seemed more comfortable in her own skin. She also started sleeping in her own room more often, not every night, but maybe half the time. When she did come to David's room, it was usually after a particularly difficult day or when she'd had a stressful phone call. But it felt different now, less like she couldn't function without being there, and more like she was choosing comfort and companionship. David found himself missing her on the nights she stayed in her own room, but he also felt proud of her growing independence, and when she did choose to sleep in his room, he enjoyed the companionship without feeling guilty about it. The day Lily's mom arrived was sunny and warm, with flowers blooming outside their building windows. David had helped Lily clean the apartment and stock the fridge with groceries. He was more nervous than he'd expected to be. When the knock came at the door, Lily practically ran to answer it. David heard voices in the hallway, and then Lily was leading a woman into the apartment who looked exactly like an older version of her daughter. Mom, this is David, Lily said, beaming. David, this is my mom, Patricia. Patricia was smaller than David had expected, still thin from her treatments, but with the same warm eyes as Lily and a smile that lit up her whole face. David, she said, reaching out to shake his hand. I can't thank you enough for taking such good care of my daughter. She takes care of herself, David replied. I just provide occasional floor space. Patricia laughed, and David could see where Lily got her sense of humor. She told me about your sleeping arrangements. Very practical solution to a heating problem. David glanced at Lily, wondering how much she'd explained to her mom about their situation, but Lily just smiled and led them into the kitchen. The three of them spent the afternoon talking, cooking together, and looking through photo albums Patricia had brought. David learned about Lily's childhood, her father's death during her sophomore year of college, and how close she and her mom had become as they navigated life as a team of two. That evening, As they sat around the kitchen table after dinner, Patricia turned to David with a serious expression. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course," David replied. "What are your intentions with my daughter?" David felt his face get warm. "I'm sorry?" "It's okay, Mom," Lily said quickly, looking embarrassed. "No, it's a fair question," Patricia continued. "You've been sharing living space, providing emotional support, helping her through a difficult time. That's not nothing. I just want to understand what this relationship is." David looked at Lily, then back at her mom. He'd been asking himself the same question for weeks. "Honestly," David said, "I'm not sure. We started as roommates, became friends, and now we're something that doesn't have a clear label. But I care about her, and I want her to be happy and successful." "And what about romantic feelings?" Patricia asked directly. David felt Lily's eyes on him as he considered his answer. "I'd be lying if I said I hadn't developed feelings," he admitted. "But Lily's been dealing with a lot of stress, and I didn't want to complicate things for her by bringing that up." Lily was quiet for a moment, then spoke up. "I've been wondering the same thing," she said softly. "About how I feel, I mean." Patricia smiled and stood up from the table. "Well, I think I'll go take a walk around the neighborhood and let you two talk this through." "Take your time." After she left, David and Lily sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. "So," Lily said eventually, "we both have feelings." "Seems like it," David agreed. "What do we do about that?" David thought about it. "Maybe we don't have to do anything dramatic. Maybe we just acknowledge it and see what happens naturally." "You mean like, keep being friends and roommates but be honest about caring about each other?" "Something like that. No pressure, no timeline, just see how things develop." Lily smiled. "I like that idea. I'm not ready for anything complicated right now, but I like knowing that you care about me the way I care about you." "And the sleeping arrangements?" David asked. "Can we keep things the way they are? Some nights in my room, some nights in yours, depending on what feels right." "That sounds perfect," David said. When Patricia returned from her walk, she found them washing dishes together and laughing about something silly. The tension from earlier was gone, replaced by an easy comfort that felt natural and unforced. That night, Lily chose to sleep in her own room to give her mom privacy in the living room. But as David settled into his bed alone, he felt content rather than lonely. They'd figured out something good together, something that worked for both of them without anyone sacrificing their independence or well-being. Sometimes the best relationships aren't about dramatic gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes they're about showing up consistently, being honest about your needs, and creating space for each other to grow. David and Lily had found their own version of warmth, and it had nothing to do with broken radiators or cold apartments. It was about choosing to care for each other, one night at a time,